Welcome, comrades and friends, to Workers' World Party's weekly broadcast, where hundreds of revolutionaries from across the world gather to strategize, to analyze, and to build the struggle for a socialist future, a workers' world. Tonight, we have an exciting panel of active members of Workers' World Party. I'm your host, Marinda Chrisman. I'm the co-editor of Tear Down the Walls, which is Workers' World newspaper's section around the struggle for prison abolition, and I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas. We are here tonight because an unprecedented winter storm hit Texas February 15th, bringing subfreezing temperatures. Over a week later, and huge sections of the population were and still are without power, heat, and/or water. People in Texas are not only struggling to recover from this freeze, but from previous hurricanes and floods caused by global warming, which produces extreme precipitation at all temperatures. This is compounded further by the COVID crisis in a state with high levels of pollution from the oil and gas industry, and also one of the largest interlocking systems of prisons, jails, and detention centers in the US. Many people have frozen to death, and deaths are likely undercounted as more bodies will be found after the thaw. The Texas Tribune reported February 18th that nearly half the state was experiencing water disruptions. Thousands had pipes burst from the freeze, which did tremendous damage to their homes and apartments. Add boil water notices to this when many families could not access heat or power, and you'll understand what a struggle it has been to survive. After months of high unemployment, record evictions, and over 500,000 virus deaths, we have a deregulated energy sector making record profits off of our misery. Billionaire owner of the Dallas Cowboys and noted benefactor of police, Jerry Jones, saw his natural gas company, Comstock Resources Incorporated, score record profits. Comstock's chief financial officer, Roland Burns, said, "This week is like hitting the jackpot with some of these incredible prices. Frankly, we were able to sell at super premium prices for a material amount of production." Meanwhile, some Texans are reporting monthly electric bills as high as $17,000. While the people suffered, Texas Senator Ted Cruz fled to Cancun, Mexico, to provide his family with better living conditions. This, given his strong anti-migrant positions and legislative actions, is ironic, to say the least. Ironic, too, is that Democrat Nancy Pelosi in September said of Cruz's party, "The country needs a strong Republican Party. It has done so much for this country." In a state long held hostage by oil and gas, the power grids failed because of lack of regulation. Texas's secessionist inclinations have at least one modern outlet, the electric grid. There are three grids in the lower 48 states: the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and Texas. Texas's grid is called ERCOT, and it's run by an agency of the same name, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. In 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Federal Power Act, which charged the Federal Power Commission with overseeing interstate electricity sales. By not crossing state lines, Texas utilities avoided being subjected to federal rules. Freedom from federal regulation was a cherished goal, more so because Texas had no regulation until the 1970s. Texas Governor Greg Abbott peddled false claims on Fox News that renewable energy sources like wind were to blame. He later had to walk back those false claims off the air. Abbott's lies still live in the minds of millions, despite evidence that it was non-renewable energy sources and deregulation to blame for the blackout. ERCOT's senior director, Dan Woodfin, cited frozen instruments at natural gas, coal, and even nuclear facilities, as well as limited supplies of natural gas. Natural gas pressure in particular is one reason power is coming back slower than expected. Chris Tomlinson reported for the Houston Chronicle on February 18th that Texas electricity generators did not want to spend the moment to build resilient equipment because it cut into their profits. The compounding crises of capital in Texas illustrate that organizing economies around profits for a few, rather than what is necessary to sustain human life, comes at the violent expense of oppressed peoples, which is why fight back is not only needed, but already underway. And please make sure to share our live stream video on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can, to post on social media. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's panel. We have Tanya Siddiqui, a member of Workers' World Party of South Asian descent. She is currently based in Dallas. We have Gloria Ruback from Houston. She helped form the first branch of Workers' World Party west of the Mississippi in 1972, and she's part of the Texas death penalty abolition movement. We also have Teresa Gutierrez, a Chicana born in San Antonio, currently residing there. She's a longtime immigrant and anti-imperialist activist. And I want to remind you all that while most people are watching on Zoom, if you could take a second to go to the Workers' World Party Facebook page and share this live video with your friends in your Facebook groups and pages, that would help us enormously to reach more members of our class. Also, we encourage you to share your comments at Workers' World on Twitter. We are also live on YouTube tonight for all of you YouTubers. For all of you on Zoom, please add your pronouns and city so we can refer to you correctly when you ask questions or type in the chat. And we have a few questions for our panelists. Up first, we live in very different areas of the state. What were conditions like in your area during the freeze and after the freeze? And Tanya, will you start us off?
Yeah, sorry, I was just in meeting. So I live in North Dallas, and I live in one of the most wealthy neighborhoods in Texas. My school is located in this area. So for me, I lost power for most of the day on Wednesday, but to be totally honest, like in terms of how I know millions of people experienced the catastrophe that we faced 2 weeks ago, I did not have the same experience. I know in Dallas, it's so obvious, right? Like where Black and Brown communities are based. And I know a lot of people in South Dallas, what they told me was that they lost power for a week. But what kept one of my friend's family alive was that they lost electricity, but they had gas heating. So they're able to keep the heat on. But I mean, I think 9 or 10 of their family members were huddled in one home, especially during a pandemic. If you think about the sort of conditions people were exposed to, it was awful. But for me, it was not like to that level. Yeah.
Thanks, Tanya. Gloria? You have to unmute, Gloria.
Okay. Well, I live in Houston. It's the, fourth largest city in the country. It's large in population, and it's also large in area. And in the winter, if it gets below 50, people think it's freezing. So when this storm hit, people sort of weren't prepared. People lost power. They lost, when the electricity went out, that was one thing. But then when you lose the heat and the water, it was a mess. And because people here aren't used to dripping their pipes and stuff, there's so many people that still don't have water because their pipes have busted and there's not enough plumbers to fix them. They said it could take 6 months before all the busted pipes are fixed. So, and I should mention too that out of about, I think 3.5 million people in the greater Houston area, almost 1 million are undocumented and from other countries. Well, anyway, okay, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Gloria. Also, being from Houston, I just want to add, our city is a city of elevated highways that go over bayous. So on top of the struggles people were facing in their homes, folks couldn't go anywhere because bridges and roads were iced over. And we don't have the infrastructure to deal with that in a timely manner. Instead of ice trucks or anything, because we don't often get subfreezing weather, road and bridge crews were laying gravel on to help with traction, but it didn't melt the ice, and conditions were very dangerous for quite a while. And Teresa, what was it like in San Antonio? we have to unmute for us.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I want to talk about my family a little bit. In my own apartment where my wife and I live, power went out like in many homes across the state around 2 a.m. Sunday night. And our apartment is fairly insulated, but it was very, very cold. And we had the so-called running outages, you know, where it might come on for an hour and so forth. I really rue the day that I lost a gas stove, because even when they told us to boil water, we have an electric stove because that's what comes with the apartment. And how can you boil the water if you have no electricity? So conditions were really difficult. You know, my other sister did not lose power, but lost water for over a week. And I want to talk a little bit about my mother in the nursing home, because it's already been so stressful for millions of people who have family in nursing homes because of the pandemic, right? And we got notices that the power went out at the nursing home. The roads, you know, were so dangerous. People have to know in the North that people in the South don't know how to drive. They don't have the experience of how to drive in icy roads. You know, the first day of the ice storm, there was 200 accidents in San Antonio in one day. And it's because you just don't know, you know, it's just, and you don't know that it doesn't, it looks like it's clear, but it's really what they call black ice. And before you know, you're careening, right? So in my mother's nursing home, very few workers could get to the nursing home. And many of these workers, because they're low-wage workers, use the bus, and the buses were not running. So it was just really stressful on top of everything. But I want to give this example of one of the cooks came in. One cook came in to cook for all these nursing home residents. The others couldn't come, but she brought her husband with her. And I was so deeply moved by that she brought her husband with her to help her cook for the residents in the nursing home. And I want to bring that up because things are so difficult for the working class. But this kind of solidarity and this kind of example of what workers do under crisis is what must keep us going, that people really, you know, do pull together. But conditions nonetheless were horrible. There were 130 fires during that week here in San Antonio because people were starting fires to try to stay warm. I mean, it was like 20, 30 degrees inside your house. And not everybody has coats and scarves and all that. You just don't necessarily have that in Texas. So you have to pile on stuff. And those fires is 6 times more than is usual. And even fire trucks were slipping on the roads. You know, this is how dangerous it was. So, you know, people died. The statewide, there's 70 people that are known to be dead, and I'm sure that the number is truly higher. I have to end with something that happened in Houston that, just in case we forget, there was an 11-year-old boy who his mother reported that on Sunday, you know, went out to enjoy the snow. And it is so true. People in Texas don't get to see the kind of snow that we got. You know, it was snow that you could play in, you know, and you usually don't have that kind of snow in South Texas, that you can actually play and make a snowman and all of that the way you can in the North. And so I can imagine a little boy from Honduras, how wonderful it felt, you know, to be out there. But within 24 hours, this little boy had frozen to death, you know. And this is the kind of thing that we have, as we go forward and towards the end of this program, that we have to develop demands to the state government and to the federal government for reparations for these kinds of losses. Here is a 11-year-old child who dies from freezing to death while Ted Cruz goes to Cancun with his children. This is the kind of leadership that we have in this, you know, quote unquote leadership in this state. And that's got to be a big fight in the coming period.
Thank you, Teresa. Next, I want us to think about, what systems led to exacerbating this crisis? Or what was the response to the freeze from government officials? Who was left in the cold, and how did we get here? Tanya, will you start us off?
Yeah, exacerbating this crisis. I mean, I just think the lack of infrastructure and the response from the government was, well, I can't curse, but whatever about your infrastructure, right? So, I mean, it didn't matter. And I remember as Teresa was talking, I was thinking also about the apartment complex that completely burned down in San Antonio, and like the firefighters, whenever they got to this apartment complex, they couldn't even use the fire hydrants because it was frozen. So there was a complete structure that burnt down. And when we talk about government officials responding to the crisis, they just responded with how they normally respond to anything, I think, just by terrorizing people in the community. Like there was a young Black man named Rodney Reese in Plano, which is like a city close to Dallas. And he was walking home after work. I believe he worked at Walmart, and like the police kept following him, asking him if he's okay, whatever. But I mean, he's wearing like the short sleeve shirt, walking in the middle of the road, trying to get home. And all these police officers are doing is just terrorizing this person. Then they arrested him. He spent the night in jail. So when we talk about what they're doing, it kind of reflects that they're only equipped to, surveil or to inflict harm on communities of color. And who was left in the cold? It was, people of color were left out to die. I mean, again, I live in a predominantly white area, and it was still surreal, of course, like being in this environment, like a snowstorm. You're already isolated during a pandemic, and you feel even more isolated because of this catastrophe that's going on around you. But like, people did not experience this the same in this city. And I know it was the same around Texas. And how did we get here? I think capitalism got us here, and also, persistent white supremacist violence. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tanya. Gloria, do you have anything to add? You have to unmute.
Tanya kind of covered it, but the response of the ruling class and the politicians. I live maybe a mile or two from downtown. From my front yard, I could see all the lights on in these giant skyscrapers downtown. And that's at a time when people in Houston didn't have lights. So, and then the former governor, Rick Perry, who was some president's Secretary of Energy, I can't remember who.
Trump.
Okay, that figures. He made the statement, I mean, if I had seen that man, I probably would have strangled him. He made a statement that said, Texans are willing to go more than 3 days without power to maintain our independence. Our independence to freeze to death? No, thank you. I don't begin to understand how the energy works, but this umbrella group called ERCOT that's supposed to be over all the utilities in Texas, they haven't, like many institutions in Texas, they haven't updated the systems for the power because they just want to make profits. So we came within 4 minutes and so many seconds away from not having power, period, for the whole state for heaven knows how long. So the ruling class, they don't even maintain their own systems. And they certainly don't care whether the working class people live or die. I guess we can be replaced. But it was a failure on so many levels, so many.
Thanks, Gloria. I would like to add, like, on when you were talking about how the skylines were lit up, that was true across multiple Texas cities. I'm thinking about how Houston has been one of a city hit hard by evictions. There's been particularly hard by evictions. There's been over 30,000 evictions in Houston since the pandemic started. I believe yesterday there was maybe 138 eviction hearing cases, like while people are still dealing with like not having power and water, which is most likely going to lead to a lot of tenant organizing. But I think about how many people have been forced on the streets. They've been abandoned, and then they face the organized violence like Tanya was talking, especially when they face other oppressions. And so when you put people on the street in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a freeze, like, people are going to die, and they did. And that's capitalism. Marissa, did you want to add anything?
Well, the only thing I wanted to add is that, the movement in Texas is about to, I believe, really step up. I think that between the pandemic and the snow freeze, everybody is now calling it Snowvidgeddon, and there's T-shirts being sold, about that I survived Snowvidgeddon. Many people have not survived. So it's tricky because on the one hand, the Republican leadership of the state, which has been in power since the 90s, is despicable. They're racist, they're reactionary, they're, Gloria said what Perry said. Abbott, tried to blame it on wind panels, on solar panels. Cruz went to Cancun, and so forth and so on. But what happened, is that the backlash, even among mainstream media, against Abbott and against these forces was immediate and quick. The denunciation of Cruz was fast. Even Cruz's, his wife's friends turned in the text, to show how despicable these people are. Somebody in their own ranks blew the whistle on them. So the backlash was so swift that Abbott had to backpedal. And right away, they started saying, oh, ERCOT has got to go. And some of the ERCOT council members, 5 of them, or maybe 6, resigned. I personally think that this is a diversion. I personally think that those that resigned were probably saying, okay, we'll take the heat for y'all. I've made my millions. I live in Germany anyway. I really don't care where they live. I wouldn't mind having a council on energy that had non-Texans on it if it was somebody from Venezuela or Cuba or Nigeria that had a people's consciousness about energy. I don't care if they don't live in Texas or not. What I care about is, are they for profit of the energy company, or are they for the people? And that's the problem with ERCOT. But the reaction, the fact that, over 70 people died, that even as of 2 days ago, 3 days ago, millions of people still did not have good water or electricity, even 3 days ago. And so the backlash has been so strong that I think it's an opportunity for the movement. They already put a hearing together in Austin. I personally think that the hearing that they put together was too fast, that it should have been public, that it should have been publicized, that it should be open to the public. I think that a People's Commission should be formed to investigate, what happened. And this Republican administration has to be put to task. And we have to expose how horrible they are. And we have to expose how too many of the Democrats are complicit by not launching a real fight back. So I feel optimistic that out of this horrible atrocity, that the struggle to change, including, the catastrophe cost the state $20 billion. Who's going to pay for that? The people who are getting 17,000 electric bill, if I got such a bill, if Gloria got such a bill, we would burn that bill in public, and we would say, we're not paying a penny more. You know, let ERCOT, let the oil companies, let them pay for the cost of the electricity during this crisis. We have paid with our lives, we've paid with our houses, you know, and so, you know, we're gonna have to fight for FEMA to not do what it did in New Orleans during Katrina. You know, we have to fight for the money to repair our homes, and so forth and so on. And so we have to be optimistic so that we can turn this crisis into a moment of struggle and fight back.
I want to add one thing, Miranda.
What?
I keep getting texts. Well, I thought that the president, what's his name, Biden, was supposed to be in Texas to help people. I've just gotten 3 text messages that he has just bombed Syria tonight. They have enough money to go bomb Syria. They can damn well come to Texas and fix stuff for the working people that are suffering. I'm furious. I'm going to have to turn my phone away because I don't want to see any more of this. But I don't know how much it costs to bomb Syria, but Texas needs money and help. And we don't want our money being used for bombing anybody.
Precisely. And if folks like what they're hearing, if you're interested in joining a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist party in the belly of the beast, then you can check out workers.org/join. You can fill out the join form and we'll have an organizer in touch with you as soon as possible. And this is not the first crisis, and it's not going to be the last crisis managed by capitalist greed. We are watching as the COVID crisis unfolds and the different responses to it. Many writers for Workers' World newspaper, as well as Ajami Baraka, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Vijay Prashad, Margaret Kimberly, Max Blumenthal, Lisu Hin, and Kevin Cease have contributed to a new anthology called Capitalism on a Ventilator: The Impact of COVID-19 in China and the US. And it's now available for sale. And more on the Texas crisis. Texas also, it has one of the largest interlocking systems of prisons, jails, and detention centers in the US. What were conditions like for people inside during the freeze? And why is it important to show solidarity with these members of our collected class? Gloria, will you start us off?
Sure. Prisons are never good in Texas, ever. But when this freeze came, it was unbelievably torturous, illegal, inhumane, whatever adjective you can think of. When I talked to one prisoner who said they were looking through the trash for pieces of plastic that they could clean and somehow try to stick up on windows to keep the air from coming in because window panes were out. It was, it was in the teens or the lower, and they've got cold air blowing in. Never mind that there's no friggin' heat, but then the water went out. So prisoners were on lockdown. The first day, when did the freeze come? Sunday night. Monday at the prisons, many people couldn't even, the guards and correctional officers couldn't even get to work. At one prison, only 10 guards came in. This was supposed to be for 2,000 incarcerated people. So everybody was put on lockdown. They couldn't move. They couldn't leave their cell. Commissary was shut down. There's no water. The toilets are backing up. I mean, it was disgusting. Plus, you couldn't wash your hands. You couldn't take a shower. There was nothing to drink. And you couldn't buy water from the commissary because the commissary shut down. So prisoners went for 3 or 4 days without a drop of anything to drink. And, you know, when I wrote the article for the paper, I didn't even cover the county jails and the detention centers because there was too much information and too much horrible things happening. But I know downtown at the Harris County Jail, which is Houston, I think the capacity is 8,000 or something, but they had 9,000 prisoners. They had no beds left, no water. I mean, it was something from a horror movie, what was going on in the prisons. And I was really aggravated when I called death row to confirm that they hadn't had water for days. And the warden's secretary says, oh, well, my water's not working either. And I'm like, and you get to go to the store and buy water when you leave. When Harvey hit, they evacuated prisoners because prisoners in South Texas, close to the Gulf of Mexico, they always flood. They had prisoners going to farther north, sleeping on the floor in gymnasiums with one porta-can for like 800 people or something. Why in the world prisons, well, they should be shut down to begin with, but in the meantime, they could have had water and cots, and you can anticipate what's going to happen and prepare for it. But the ruling not only does the ruling class not prepare for workers in the cities, they don't even think about what's going on in the prisons. And the prison guards were actually complaining because they said they were being held hostage. They wouldn't let them leave because there were other guards coming in. So the situation in detention centers, I mean, I read about little kids crying because their feet were freezing. And so from the detention centers to the county jails to the prisons, it was nothing but hell, absolute hell.
Thank you, Gloria. Sorry, I was muted. Teresa, did you want to add anything?
Not about the detention centers, no. I think Gloria did a great job. It's like she said, it's appalling. It's a nightmare. So this is something that the hearings in Austin will not take up. So that's why it's important for the people's movement to be sure that we raise what's happening in the concentration camps of the working class.
Yeah. I think it's important to show our solidarity with folks who are locked up inside, because that's what awaits us, you know. That's the tool that's used against us to like force us into jobs with low wages. And I'm thinking about the Harris County Jail. Capacity is around 9,000, and they have that many folks inside right now. 87% of the people inside of the Harris County Jail are there pre-trial. And so they haven't been convicted of anything. They're being held in there, facing a possible death sentence with COVID, just because they can't afford to pay bail. And 49% of the folks locked up in the Harris County downtown jail are Black. And Black people make up 19% of the population in Houston. We have disproportionate numbers of Black and Brown people locked up. And that is not new to this part of the world. That has been the case since colonization on this continent, to force people to work for little to nothing with no protections. Tanya, did you want to add anything, or we can move to the next?
Yeah, as everyone was talking about, just like, especially when you, Gloria, and Teresa were talking about conditions, and Teresa, you said that this is not going to be an issue that's raised in Austin. Is that what you said?
Not likely, I'm assuming.
Okay, and no, because I had sent an article about the conditions in the prisons and jails to one of my friends, and the response was, you know, the media exaggerates so much sometimes. And that pissed me off and I was angry. I also thought about how the carceral state has really like taken over even the sort of what we can imagine to be the worst of it. It's like there's something that does not allow someone to see, right, things for what it is. And so I'm thinking with this catastrophe that we've seen in Texas and the climate catastrophe that other places will experience soon, if they're not already experiencing it now, is that this is going to happen. And I think it's really important for people who are listening tonight, if they're not a part of, you know, a grassroots organization, Marxist-Leninist organization, workers' world, to really join and think about what this means for your community and for your people, because it's not just, you know, one sector of life that is disrupted or harmed. It's going to be every single facet. And we're seeing that here in Texas, and people are going to see that wherever they respectively are right now if they're not seeing it yet.
I do want to mention something about Texas. You know, Governor Abbott, you know, we can't expect anything decent when it came to the recent Snowvid crisis. He's the one who's passing legislation to get people off Medicaid. He's spent a lot of time defending Chick-fil-A, which is an anti-gay organization. And so he doesn't want state services to allow same-sex partners to adopt children. You know, this is what they spend their time on instead of pushing to winterize the energy industry in the state, right? But Texas actually is a very interesting place. You know, I had an exchange with a comrade in New York who's moving to New Mexico shortly, and I sent her some gifts about, you know, New Mexico, and all these beautiful gifts came up about the native culture and how beautiful it is, and the you know, what a beautiful state it was. So when I tried to look for a gift about Texas, you know, these redneck, you know, you know, just horrible racist, gun-toting, you know, wild people of Texas, like it's a white state and it's a bunch of Republicans. That's not what Texas is, sisters and brothers. Texas is one of the 5 states in the country that is predominantly people of color. You wouldn't know that by the way the media or the right-wing culture portrays Texas. Houston is now more diverse, it has more people of color, more immigrants than New York. You know, back in the day, New York used to be, you know, the most diverse. It's now Houston. You know, there's a lot of potential here. And, you know, they make it sound as if, you know, yes, the Republican ideology, that sort of thinking has taken hold and has taken hold for a long time. But Texas was the place where Mexicans and whites helped freed enslaved people and took them into Texas or helped them get into Mexico. One of the state songs of Texas, which is the Yellow Rose of Texas, I used to hate that song because I thought it was a racist song. And it turns out that the Yellow Rose of Texas was actually written by a free enslaved person who wrote about the woman that he loved. And I was like, so like, oh, thank God, you know, it's not a racist song, you know. And so Texas, and Texas also is the place where Mexicanos defeated gringos at the Alamo, you know. And so, you know, we have to take back that culture of what Texas really is. And there's more immigrants in this state than ever. They comprise at least 22% of the workforce in Texas. Many of them are undocumented. And these are the folks that are not going to report that their houses have fallen or their pipes have burst and they have nowhere to live because they risk deportation. And so the movement and the people's movement has to raise these issues because Governor Abbott and all the rest will not do that. And so this is one of the things that we have to struggle for, you know, and I feel very optimistic about that. I mean, I feel like things are going to turn into a real working class struggle in Texas. And maybe because we want to win the hearts and minds of people, maybe more people will unite to get a Republican out than they will for socialism. But maybe that'll be a victory that will unite people and people can unite around something. And I think this is important, you know, that we should be very optimistic, because right now people are suffering, people are demoralized, people are down, people are going to get even more, their income's going to go down even worse, you know, after all of this. So we have to be prepared, you know, to be confident about the coming period.
I'm so glad. Oh, go ahead, Gloria.
To add on to that, Teresa, on Inauguration Day, January 20th, the Brown Berets in Houston had an action that was so powerful. They said on day one, we want Biden to know that we want the immigration detention center shut down. We want the deportations to stop, period. So they had a demonstration at a detention center for unaccompanied minors. They had Aztec dancers out there. They had a big, and they actually did this countrywide. The Mesodetic, like the head leadership of the Brown Berets, put out like, I think 10 demands, and they were excellent. Then we car caravan through downtown with signs on our cars in support of immigrants. We wound up at a bridge over a freeway here that has like 60,000 cars every 30 minutes or something. We had a sign, a honk sign, and the whole time we were there was constant honking from the people on that freeway. I was surprised. There is a change of consciousness among working people who were driving home after work on January 20th to support immigrants. That's a big change, a big change. And so I agree with you. Things are going to heat up for the struggle.
Weather-wise and struggle-wise, yes.
Oh, they've already heated up weather-wise, thank heavens.
Thank y'all for talking so much about fight back. That's so important, because what's happening wasn't inevitable, and it doesn't have to be the way that we live. Which kind of leads me into our next question. Right, we've seen what the capitalists have in store for us when it comes to the climate crisis, which we know is only increasing in intensity. How would socialists respond to climate disasters in places like Cuba? What do their responses look like?
I mean, I can talk about going to Cuba after my house was almost destroyed by a hurricane, and Cuba had been hit. I don't know if it was the same hurricane, but I stayed in the province where people had already rebuilt houses, rebuilt schools. Society was functioning. One of the, I don't know if it was a Cuban or somebody with Pastors for Peace, I can't remember, but they said to prepare for a natural disaster in Cuba is like a military operation. You do this first and then this and so on. They have plans. Not only do they first make sure that the older people are taken care of, and then the kids and on down, they make sure the animals are taken care of. There's no horses and cows like floating away in a hurricane. But that's because of socialist planning and socialist responsibilities. The committees for the defense of the revolution organize to, I mean, you can't control when a hurricane's coming, but you can sure as hell prepare for it. Whereas, I mean, we can look at what happened in Katrina. We can look at, oh God, what happened in Houston with Harvey. People still have blue tarps on their roof here from Hurricane Harvey. And I think that was 3 years ago,
2017.
almost 4 years. Yeah, because they can't afford to get their roofs fixed. And those blue tarps aren't in the wealthy areas. They're in very poor working class communities, communities of color.
Thanks, Gloria. I'm going to add just a little bit to what you said, then I'm going to introduce Judy Lerma from San Antonio. When hurricanes hit Cuba, right, they have the government gives folks 7 days notice to prepare, and they run drills so they know exactly what to do. There's a very clear chain of command from the committees in defense of the revolution up through the government. They're organized block by block, and I would bet that if like a freeze or what happened in Cuba, people would have been notified ahead of time to turn their water mains off, to empty their pipes. The preparation is key, and we just didn't see any of that here. Socialist responses center human needs over profit. We wouldn't see record profits for necessities like power and water. And so there's a lot to learn by looking at socialist responses to these crises. And I want to introduce Judy Lermo, coming to us from San Antonio. She is a nurse and a co-founder of the National Nurses Organizing Committee of Texas. Judy, could you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in hospitals throughout this crisis?
Sure. Thank you, Miranda. As Miranda said, my name is Judy Lerma. I'm in San Antonio, and I'm a registered nurse. I don't actually work in a hospital. I work in a psychiatric crisis center, which is in the downtown area. It's a 48-hour observation facility where patients in psychiatric crisis are brought, taken care of, and an appropriate disposition is figured out within that 48 hours. That's the way things usually work. Because of this weather catastrophe, we had extended stays in our facility. Some of the folks that were there came in before the weather even got cold. So they came in, wearing t-shirts and shorts and sandals. The way it's set up is we have 2 bays, and each bay has 8 beds, and each bay has 2 bathrooms. So when the weather got bad, we didn't lose power this time. We have lost power in the past, both in the winter and in the summer. And it's almost as bad in the summer as it is in the winter. So we didn't lose power, but we did lose water pressure. That happened probably during the night on Monday before I got there on Tuesday morning, but we didn't realize it for several hours. So that means that we had 2 bathrooms in each bay being used by 8 people in each bay. And before long, we realized that the toilets didn't flush. So they got fuller and fuller, and we kept calling administration, who of course were at home, cozy and safe. So we kept calling them. They kept saying that they would get the plumbers there, and they have plumbers that work for the facility, so they didn't have to go through the yellow pages or anything. So they kept telling us they were going to get the plumbers there. Finally, the plumbers came, and they said they couldn't do anything because the water pressure was out, because the water processing plant couldn't work without electricity. So anyway, then the administration had this brilliant idea that they were going to get a porta potty, and they were going to put it outside. And they were expecting us to take patients in shorts and t-shirts outside to use a porta potty. I mean, that was just insane. And so we just kept arguing with them, and we told them that, people were just going to have to keep using the bathrooms the way they were, and that's all we could do. Thankfully, the doctors didn't discharge people in the snow. Most of our patients are homeless, and that would have been just a completely heartless thing to do. And so folks, stayed for a very long time there. So that was one issue. Then after we'd been without water pressure, we learned from the city that the water was no longer going to be safe to drink, and it had to be boiled. So we had to bring in all this this bottled water for patients. I'm sorry. So we had to bring in all this bottled water. Then let's see, I scribbled myself a couple of notes here. Let me see what else I wanted to tell you. We got, during all of this, we got an email that was addressed to everybody, but it was targeted specifically at the staff who work in detox and crisis, because we're the only ones that work 24 hours. The rest are just clinics and administrators. So they told us that we were considered essential workers, and under no circumstances would we be considered excused if we didn't come to work. No water was not an excuse, no power was not an excuse, and no transportation was not an excuse. So then they told us that if we felt like it was unsafe to drive, that they would gather together some of the employees that had these big pickup trucks with the giant tires to come and pick us up and take us back home again. So, okay, so that's what they were going to do. So one of my friends is a tech who works in crisis, and he has one of those big trucks. So he was told that he had to do that. He had to pick people up and take people home. And our medical director also has one of those trucks. So my friend asked the medical director if he too was going to be picking people up and taking them home. And he said, "Are you kidding? It's not safe to go out in this. I'm not coming out." There's not anything I can say to make that sound any worse than it already sounds. Let me see what else I wrote here. One other thing was that a lot of the people who came in on Sunday night stayed over, and some of them stayed for 24 hours. And so our clinic director asked our immediate supervisor what happened to Avery, that one of the techs that works with us. And he said, "Well, he went home." And she said, "Why did you let him go home?" And he said, "Well, I didn't let him go home. He'd been here for 24 hours. And she said, "Well, I hope you didn't." He said, "We can't force him to stay." And she said, "Well, I hope you didn't tell him that." So anyway, the temperature has risen and the snow has melted, and our place is kind of back to normal. It's back to our overworked, understaffed, regular routine. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you for your report, Judy. I wanted to make Teresa, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to go back to Cuba for a minute.
Sure.
Because I think there's one important piece of information that you don't have to be a revolutionary, a socialist, or even progressive to know that Cuba, per the word of the United Nations, is the #1 most sustainable country in the world. And that's because their socialist planning puts peoples before profits, and because they don't have corporations or banks or energy companies that exploit the environment or the people. All you have to do is compare the coral reefs of Florida to Cuba to know that capitalism sucks and socialism works. And the kind of leadership that Cuba has versus what Texas is facing right now. There's something else that I think is important that we can learn from Cuba. Because right now we're facing, the alt-right, the legacy of the hated anti-immigrant, racist, misogynist Trump that has sort of set an agenda for the right wing, and many working class folks and others fall under the sway of this kind of ideology and this kind of thinking. And at one point, Cuba's leader, Fidel, raised the idea of organizing the whole country to carry out this campaign called the Battle of Ideas. And he said that for a long time, the political leadership of Cuba had been more worried about slogans than arguments, and that we had to learn to argue to win the hearts and minds of the working class, right? Not to argue, fight, but to argue to change ideas. And he said something that I thought was very important. He said that we must do the convincing and persuading of human beings one by one. Their religions were created this way and have lasted thousands of years. And we've got to do this among, our population. And so when I think the news that Biden bombed Syria is horrible. It's horrible for the Syrian people. It's horrible for the workers, that the money is being, in here in this country, that the money is being used to go to bombs instead of for infrastructure in Texas. But this is an opportunity for us to show that the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans, even though the Democrats may speak more sane and they may be more respectable and so forth and so on, but they're going to war. A Democratic administration is now going to war when the people of Texas need so much. And you don't have to be a socialist or a revolutionary to know that this is wrong, that this is very, very wrong. And my house needs fixing, and don't have anything. So I think this is really very important. And I think that's also why Governor Abbott said today that he is reconsidering bringing down the mask requirement, that maybe you don't have to wear a mask to go into the store now. And this is criminal as well, because families have had to come together, because if they didn't have electricity, they went to neighbors or families. There might be more exposure to COVID this way. People fell down people had carbon monoxide poisoning, had to go to the hospital. So the possibility of COVID rising as a result of Snowmageddon is very high. So for Abbott to announce this, again, this is another diversion. This is another attempt to put the onus of the ills of the society on the backs of the working class. And they don't care if people are going to die from COVID. They just don't care, if workers, because they can go to Cancun or they can go to their McMansions and so forth, So I think this is really important, and I hope that we have time at the end of the program to actually develop some demands, like, for example, Abbott did say that they were going to have a moratorium on disconnections from the electric system, but is that moratorium for a month or is it for a year, which is what it should be, And the electric company is saying that they're going to put the onus of the cost of this crisis on our backs, not necessarily in one check, but one electric bill, but in several. And we've got to fight to not have any of that cost in our bills. We should not pay any more. We want a regulated, pro-people electric system, not ERCOT, not the rest. And we want sustainable energy. This is what Texas needs.
Thank you, Tessa. I'm going to make a quick announcement. Workers' World newspaper has been in continuous circulation since 1959. During the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the print edition was temporarily suspended, but we are happy to announce that we've resumed printing physical copies of Workers' World newspaper again on a monthly basis. You can also subscribe to read Workers' World newspaper by email at workers.org. And we are proud that Workers' World is an important tool for political education and organization behind the walls of the U.S. carceral system. And we provide free subscriptions to anyone who is currently incarcerated. We print and mail the newspaper directly to our comrades and friends behind bars at no cost. Please help us sustain our prisoner subscription program by subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/WWP. You can donate to help our other organizing efforts by Venmo and by going to workers.org. work. And kind of picking back up on what Teresa was talking about with demands, we can go around and kind of give closing statements and talk about what we demand, what we want to see coming out of this crisis.
I can say, I can start. What I would like to see coming out of this crisis is what Teresa was saying is that, this is I know it's a really challenging time. I also think that there's a lot of possibility in the time that we're in right now, because there's pressure on so many different, I guess, sectors of workers. I've read, so many employers are expecting their employees to use their personal time off to, make up for the week. My school has canceled spring break, which doesn't seem, I guess, like a huge thing in the context of where I am. But I mean, a year's worth of pandemic problems on top of this week long that we weren't in school. It's not like we were leisuring, right? And I know a lot of my classmates they did not even have water the day that we started classes back up. So I think there's a lot of pressure on people because there is no room for, there's no sort of protection for the people. So I think that this is only going to sort of heat the movement or the moment that we're in, and hopefully that will generate a movement. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this.
Thank you, Tanya. Gloria?
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple of points. One is that this freeze has taught all of us in Texas what it means to be an essential worker. And those are the people that came to work in grocery stores, pharmacies, the people that went to work risking not only driving on icy roads, but risking the virus. Kroger grocery store, which is one of the largest in the country, at the beginning of COVID was giving them extra pay. They quit doing that. Kroger workers have died from the virus. And Kroger doesn't even, I was in that store the other day, there was people who were not wearing masks. They don't even enforce that. And I told some man, I said, I have an extra mask if you need it. And I can't even repeat what he told me. But workers are essential. Our class is essential to keep things going. The governor and Ted Cruz and all of them, they can disappear. We don't need them. But workers are essential. The other thing is that there's prisoners dying in prison right now from COVID. It's like they had a death sentence. There's actually, what's the figure? 79% of the prisoners who tested positive for COVID were already up for parole, but they wouldn't release them because they hadn't taken some class that the prison system requires before you're freed. People are dying in prisons, they're dying in the neighborhoods, and it's up to us to make the changes, to make the demands, to organize. And like Teresa said, even if it means talking one-on-one, we have a job cut out for us.
Thank you, Gloria. Final comments, Teresa, Judy?
I have one final comment. I read this article from this worker that was working at a grocery store, and she had an answer about, being called a hero. And she said, calling me a hero is just to make you feel good, and I think she was saying not so much you, a fellow coworker, but rather the media and the government idea to make essential workers heroes. You're not a hero if you're not getting paid at least $25 an hour, or if you don't have adequate health care, et cetera. So On the other hand, I go back to how I started, the one cook at my mother's nursing home who came in to feed the entire nursing home, you want to call her a hero. And she brought her husband to help her, So the best thing to do for that worker is to fight to raise the minimum wage, to fight to get CNAs and other workers at nursing homes and hospitals to have a union, and so forth and so on. So this is, I think, what our challenge is. And I'm very optimistic about all of this, even though times are really hard for our class.
Thank you so much. Judy?
Okay, I'll go next. I wouldn't be a good nurse if I didn't say single payer, Medicare for all.
Right.
This whole crisis, the weather, the COVID, the economic downturn, all of this is just a grim reminder of the fact that we need to fight back. No workers are disposable. No patients are disposable. None of us are disposable. And we all deserve to be healthy. That's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just kind of wrapping up my own thoughts. I would like to see more demands around mass releases for the people who have been tortured inside prisons, jails, and detention centers during this crisis. And because of COVID, it is a public health crisis to keep them contained in such small areas where they're subject to quick spread. I'd also like to see us, when we're talking about raising the minimum wage, we need to be raising the minimum wage for incarcerated workers as well. Everybody should have a livable wage and be able to make their way in the world. And I'd really like to see us fight the oil and gas companies a bit more as well. I know they've had such a strong grip over Texas, and they're able to do so because when you protest oil pipelines, you can be hit with felony charges and locked up for decades. So we have to fight criminalization, and we have to fight the oil and gas companies and deregulation. And if you've liked this conversation, if you want to read more from Workers' World and our other great comrades, you can also check out our new book, What Road to Socialism. You can buy it online or download a copy for free at workers.org/books. And I really want to thank everybody, all of our panelists, for being on and sharing in the midst of this crisis, that there is a spirit of fight back, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. So I'd like to let everyone know that you can join us again this time next week at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern time, every Thursday. Please make sure you don't miss our special event hosted by Workers' World Party's Women and Gender Press Caucus on Sunday, March 21st for Women's History Month. Stay safe, get involved, and build a workers' world.
The revolution's going to start in Texas.
It sure is. Thank you.